Hey guys, kinggath here with Bethesda Mod School. In this video, we're going to cover assignable workshop items. And the way I'm going to approach this tutorial is I'm going to take one of the more complex assignable workshop items that exist in the vanilla game, and I'm going to explain exactly what every single field does. And that should help you make copies of the existing workshop items and edit them in a way that satisfies you, whether it be by replacing the art or changing out the animation or changing some of the ways it benefits your settlement. I think if I explain to you everything on this particular form we're looking at here, that should be enough to get you at least dangerous so that you can make some serious headway in your workshop items. And then we'll likely come back to the subject in the future because there's tons more to be covered with workshop items. They're a very deep topic. There's a lot going on with them. There's different types you can do. But I think this particular will be great to move on from here so that you guys can take this in combination with the 103 tutorial, and it will cover most of your bases, and it should give you at least the information you need to continue to ask questions to figure out more of it until I get a chance to come back and cover all that, because I don't want to get stuck on workshop items for too long, because there's a lot more subjects I'd like to touch on the basics of to give more people an opportunity to get moving forward on the particular parts of Fallout 4 modding that interest them. All right, so like I said, we're starting with the bar because I believe it's one of the more advanced ones. And I think all you're going to need for this particular tutorial is just the basics. You just need to know how to open up a plugin. I'm using the plugin I've been using in the previous tutorials. And other than that, I don't think you're going to need a ton of information because I'm mostly going to be just going over stuff. And I'm going to show you exactly how to take this particular item and convert it into an alternate model with a slightly different animation. So you should, as long as you've got the CK101 video, you should be good to proceed with this. So in the upper left-hand corner here, we'll start with the ID field. Just like every other form in the creation kit, it's got to be something unique. Again, I always recommend setting something up with your prefix, and I'm going to go ahead now and change this now because my plan is by the end of this video to not only have explained this whole form, but also have customized it in a way so that you can understand exactly what it is that is required to create yourself a custom version of one of these, because that's the best way to start when you're modding if you're trying to create new things, is to take something that almost does what you want already and just start tweaking with that. And so that's what I'm going to do for this. So I'm going to call this KG test. That's the prefix I've been using throughout these tutorials so far. And I'm going to call this one outhouse bar, and I'm going to give it an O2. If you see in the upper right hand corner of my screen here, object window, I've already built a KG test outhouse bar in this plugin, and that was me just going over this before I started recording the video just to make sure that I had all the steps down in my head so that I could go through this one take. So I'm calling this one Outhouse Bar 02. Next up is the name field, and if you went through my original workshop item tutorial, which would have been the 103, CK103 tutorial, you'll know that this is what the player will see when they highlight over this while in workshop mode. So we're going to, again, change this guy. We're going to change it to, oh, if I could spell, that'd be great, Outhouse Bar. All right, the next field here is the model, and this is, so you'll notice there are two model fields here, and the first one is the physical model there. So in that case, it's the bar. It's not these blue men. These are a marker, so these will not show up in the game. I'm sure you're familiar with that. When you build one of these workshop items, these blue guys are not standing there behind it. So that the base model is everything but these weird colored markers, and that is what we're going to change. So we are going to use our outhouse bar that we created in an earlier plugin, and you guys can change this out to anything else. Like, for example, you could use an existing model in the creation kit found anywhere else. If you don't know how to do this, definitely go check back to some of the earlier tutorials, because this is something that was covered earlier. But basically, almost everything in the game has a model field, and you can basically copy paste this path and change out those models. But if you're not comfortable with that, I would definitely recommend going through some of those earlier tutorials. All right, so we're going to just go ahead and use the outhouse that I created in one of the earlier tutorials. And we'll worry about fixing these blue men in a second here. But you can see that it only changed out the bar, and the actual blue guys are still there. And that is normal. So then we come down to the next field, the marker model. And the marker model represents two things. One is it helps you set up the point where the NPCs will actually interact with your object, but it's also giving you a visual representation of kind of how the animation might look. So in the case of this particular one, we're going to want them, obviously we've got a toilet seat. I think our bartender is going to sit down on the toilet. That's how this guy's going to work. And so the marker models you can find on the various furniture objects. So if you're looking for one to copy and paste the marker model for so that you can change it out and get the one that matches the animation you want, you generally would just go into the furniture section, and I find it best to just filter on workshop, and that will bring up all the different workshop items, and then you can just check them all and find the one that has the marker you're looking for. Some of them aren't used for the workshop items because there are a lot more animations, and so then you can get rid of this workshop and just start searching through all of them. So this is something you'll get used to over time. You can especially learn a lot by digging into sim settlements. If you load up sim settlements, you'll know that we've covered just about every animation that's available, and we've used it in some form. So in that case, if you have sim settlements loaded up in the creation kit, you can actually search for kgsim, which is the prefix I use in that, while you're clicked on furniture, and you'll find tons of different examples of how you can use various markers and the different animations. And I'll show you the other part of the animations. The marker model is just one part, and I'll show you the other part before we finish this, so don't get too worried about that yet. But just know if you're looking for more options for what you can use, I would highly recommend loading up sim settlements in the creation kit to take a look at it, and filter on kgsim under furniture. All right, so there's one with the sitting animation. This is one where it's a little bit different. It's stranger than the others. It's actually the default marker model. So the way you get the sitting marker model is you actually just erase the field. Now to do that, when you click edit on the marker model, what it's going to do is going to bring you up into one of these Windows Explorer style menus where you're meant to navigate. Well, you can still copy paste right in here. So just like we did with the model field where we pasted, you could still paste into here. So don't be confused by this particular menu. You could still take a marker, and I'm going to just do that for the sake of showing you how it looks. But if we took, like, say, for example, the marker from the artillery object here, so if I just copy this and I come into here and I paste it right here, that will still work correctly and it will pop up here. So even though the screen is different, it still does work. Now with the sitting, it's actually the default marker, so you have to erase it out. So you basically just erase this so there's nothing here and hit open. Actually, it's actually just cancel. You erase it out and hit cancel, and it should delete the field there, and you'll get the nice sitting marker. So that's what we want there. So next one down is destruction data. We're not going to mess with that. That would be something for another tutorial. If you're interested in destruction data for workshop items, check out some of the items that you have seen be destroyed, such as the generators. Those are a great example to learn how that particular thing works. So we're going to skip down now and go to interact point. So the interact point is the spot where the NPC will actually engage with your particular object, and it's represented by the marker model. So you can end up with multiple of these interact points on there. You'll find that some of the workshop objects, like the bunk beds, or rather the not the bunk beds, the side-by-sides beds, like the very large ones, might have 2 of these. Same with things like the large picnic benches or the vault tables. You'll find multiple of these interact points, and that's just telling you how many different NPCs can use that object simultaneously. Most workshop objects that are assignable are just going to have 1. And that will generally be called interact point 0. And when you select that, it will ungray out all of this section over here, the marker position orientation, and that's what we're going to play with next. So if you can roll your mouse wheel around in this particular preview screen. You can also drag your left mouse button to look around at this so that you can get yourself a better angle. And basically what you want to do, and you can hold down the middle mouse button and drag to reposition. So you've got a lot of options here. So it's left drag to rotate, middle drag to move, and then roll in and out your mouse wheel to zoom, and you can basically find yourself a position where you get a good view of your blue guy and your model, and then you just start tweaking some of these values. So it looks like Z, that's up down. We need to get him up a little bit because he's kind of sinking into the toilet. We definitely need to rotate him around. If you're not familiar with rotation math, you're going to have a lot of problem doing CK work. This is considered real basic geometry, so it's based on 360 degrees. 180 would be to turn them all the way around. If you don't know that, if you don't know the rotation thing, that modding might not be for you. This XYZ thing you'll just get the hang of over time. But basically just move this around here, and you're just going to tweak these. And I'm tweaking these by rolling my mouse wheel. You could also do it by clicking. And you can also do it by actually typing in values here. I like rolling my mouse wheel so that I can see in real time the updates, adjust my vision a little bit, and just get him so where he looks comfortable on the John there. So there we go. I think that's a good spot. He's not clipping in. It looks like he'll sit nicely. And sometimes what you'll find is after you set all of this up, when you go in game, it might not look perfect. You might need to come back and tweak these, and that's normal. All right, so the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to eliminate some of these circles, because each of these circles determines a position the NPC can approach that marker from. And so obviously we don't want the NPC to like clip through these walls here. We want them to always approach from the front. And it's very easy. While you have this interact point selected, you just remove the ones you don't want. So I would remove rear, right, left, other, and we want to leave front. Now, before I actually missed a step here, and the reason that there's not a circle out here, we need to change the animation type. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. So this is something you will learn by looking at the same object that you got the marker model from will have the appropriate keyword that you're going to need to set up the animation. So the way the animations are determined, and they also determine where these entry circles appear, is based on this keyword that starts with anim, F-U-R-N. Now there's a whole bunch of these, and this is why I said it's useful to go into some settlements to see an example of how to use each of them, because we've covered most of them. But you can also come in here, right click and hit add, and just start searching for that. So in this pop-up here that comes up, select form, we can type in anim, F-U-R-N, and you'll get a whole bunch of these options to choose from. And you can experiment with them and try and figure out which ones will work. Not all of them will work for players. Most of them have, if they're not for a human, they will have the race next to it. So for example, anim for an alien isn't going to work for the player, anim for an behemoth is definitely not going to work for the player, etc. And that's generally how you can kind of process elimination, figure out which ones are relevant. So we're going to go ahead and do a search, because I'm not exactly sure what this one is called. So we're going to do an asterisk and then sit, because I know sit is in there. And what we're going to want, anim, fern, chair, sit anims. That's the one that works for chairs. So I could have found that out this way by doing that searching. You could have also found it by just searching for chair while I'm in furniture. And then if you bring up almost any chair, so if you grab this, say, institute chair here, and I look at the keywords they have, and you can see they have anim, fern, chair, sit anims. They also have this one, anim, fern, allow eating. That's an optional one if you have that as well with a particular furniture. Not all of them support it, but certain furniture will allow the NPC to periodically pull out food and eat it while they're sitting there. So there's a host of like extra keywords that you'll find. I'm not going to go into the details about how each of those work, but what I would just recommend you do is just check out different furniture and pay attention to things you see in the game. And if you're looking to copy them, you can basically just look up that item in the creation kit and just copy the words that they have there. So we're going to go ahead and not let them eat on the toilet, although that would be funny. And we're going to go ahead and delete this bar shopkeep, because we don't want them to do those animations anymore. So you delete those by selecting a keyword in this list, and you can right click and hit delete, or just press the delete key on your keyboard. And so now that we have anim, fern, chair, sit anims here, you'll see that a new teal circle appeared here in the front. And that's what we wanted to see, because that particular animation does support people entering from the front. And as long as this circle isn't blocked by anything, the NPC should be able to safely use your furniture. So they should be good to go now to use what's going to become our toilet bar. And we're going to come back to this keyword section in a second. It was just important that I show you the anim, fern keyword thing right now in order to ensure that these circles work. All right, so now we're going to go to some of these other sections on the left half of the screen, just so I can explain what they do. And we'll double back to this workshop object script as the very last thing we do, because that's got a lot to it that'll be confusing, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys right away. So we will just skip that one and go over to mod data here. This is one that you will essentially never use. This would be something that would be very advanced. It's going to be probably only used by people who do 3D modeling and whatnot. I don't believe there are, and I could be mistaken on this, but I don't believe there are any of the vanilla workshop items that make use of this particular system. It might be that the teleporter that you build in the main quest line of Fallout 4 uses this, but that would likely be the only one I can think of. So I think you can ignore this section for the most part at all times. If we go back up above the marker position data, you'll see there's native terminal here. This is another one you'll almost never use. There's a few examples of things you'll use, but I would skip it for the most part. Bench type and uses skill. So bench type, you're going to find if you look at some of the objects that are custom workbenches, or that are workbenches rather. So like the chemistry workstation, the power armor station, stuff like that. Those will have a particular bench type, and you'd want to just copy the appropriate keyword from there. Or I'm sorry, choose the appropriate bench type from the list that matches those existing vanilla ones. So yes, you can make custom workbenches. It's very, very easy. And it tends to be that you just take one of the existing ones and you just customize the model and the marker, just like I just showed you to do for this. So that tends to be all you have to do, because if you're editing one of the existing ones, the bench type will already be filled out for you. The uses skill is a holdover from Skyrim. It's not actually used as far as I know by the Fallout 4 engine, so you'll never use this particular dropdown. And then let's go over these check marks here. So the random anim start, what that means is that when the NPC starts using this object, they will start at a random point in the animation. And this is very useful if you plan on having a bunch of this particular item set out in a row and you don't want all of the NPCs to be in sync with each other, because it would look very unimmersive. Even if they're off sync by just a little tiny bit, it's perfect, and that's where the random can help. But if you were ever to see 3 or 4 guys in a row doing the exact same animation at the exact same frame, it would be very jarring. And so that's where this can be useful. It's not used a ton by the vanilla game, but I'm sure if you dig around through the different furniture, you'll find a few examples where it is used. Child can use should be obvious. It just lets children use that particular thing. Note that that doesn't guarantee the children have the appropriate animations to use this. So there's a big lack of animations for the children in the base game, and that's why most of the items do not allow children to use them, is because when they go to use those items, if they don't have the animations, they will either just freeze, the AI won't be able to do things, or I have seen in the past where if the child is a settler, they will not be able to be assigned ever again because they get stuck permanently. So be wary when you're adding this child can use checkbox. Is marker is something that you will pretty rarely use, I would think, but essentially what it does is it will make it so the game never actually renders your object, and that has its uses. For example, if you were just trying to use something as a placeholder, it would tend to be that you would probably just use the marker model field and not have a model at all. But if for some reason you really needed a model field to represent something when you're building a space and you didn't want it to render when the player's in the game, that's what this is marker would check. I would assume this is a very advanced feature, something most of you will never use. Disables activation. If this is checked in, it basically will prevent anyone from interacting with this. I can't think of a reason that you would make use of that, but it's likely that there's some example in the game, or this is a holdover from Skyrim. Same with use static avoid node. I don't believe there are anything that actually use this, and so these last two on the left here are probably something you'll never ever use. MustExitToTalk. This tends to get used by anything that's a bed or some sort of sleeping marker, because basically you don't want the NPC to lay there talking. You want them to actually stand up. And so MustExitToTalk forces them to stand up out of their sleeping animation or whatever animation. It's not required to be used on a bed, but that's what Bethesda tends to use it for. But for example, we could set up, if we wanted, MustExitToTalk, and then our guy would have to stand up from the toilet before he could talk to us. So yeah, we could use it that way. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to do on a bar object, because obviously we want to shop from them. We want to interact with them and purchase from them. So that would probably actually break the way the dialogue works. But you could make use of this for various things, but for the most part, it's used for beds. Is Perch is kind of a holdover from Skyrim. It was used for dragons, but it's also actually used for vertibirds on the Pridwin to allow them to kind of park up there. And so the perch just is kind of like the idea of a bird perch, where the NPC is frozen in time. And yes, vertibirds are actual NPCs in this game. They're not actually considered inanimate objects. They're basically the dragons of Fallout 4. Ignored by sandbox. This can often be useful if you want to set up something that acts kind of like a player-only thing. Now, this has nothing to do with assignment. So we're often, I think we assume assignment issues are causing a lot of things like that. And assignment and sandboxing are two totally different things. Sandboxing is when the AI is just wandering around aimlessly, just doing arbitrary things. So you'll often see this in Fallout 4 outside of settlements. You'll see the NPCs will just kind of wander around, and then they'll occasionally do like an idle animation and stuff. That's called sandboxing. And if you check in this ignored by sandbox on your object, then NPCs in the world won't use this automatically. So essentially you would do that for things where you only want the player to be able to interact with it, or if you were doing some sort of quest modding, you could set that up. If you only want this particular object to be used by your character in your quest scenes, it's a pretty advanced feature other than using it for a player-only type of thing. But keep in mind, it has nothing to do with assignment. That is something you would do elsewhere to prevent NPC assignment. We'll cover that in a bit. Play anim when full. This basically means that none of the NPCs should play their animations until all of the interact points are filled. So this can be useful if for some reason you had a particular object that had, say, 2 or 3 interaction points and you don't want them to animate until all of the characters are in place, maybe with some sort of paired animation, it's probably more advanced than most of you will ever use, but that's what it does. Allow awake sound. I've actually never seen an example, so I couldn't tell you. The use static void node and allow awake sound are two I've never seen. I have no idea what they do. I assume they're probably holdovers from Skyrim or maybe even older in the engine. They probably have some function that I'm not aware of, and you will never use these for Fallout 4. All right, and then the last one on the left here is interact conditions. This is another one of those things similar to Sandbox where when you set this, you might assume it has to do with assignment. It has nothing to do with assignment. It just determines who can actually interact with the object and play the animations. And you could set up all sorts of things with conditions. We'll cover conditions in a future video. They're in fact, probably multiple videos. They're a very complex topic. They're very powerful. But essentially, you can set up things that will analyze what's going on in the game world, such as like which quests are complete or whether or not that NPC is like, for example, you could use interact conditions to prevent non-super mutants from using an object, or only ghouls can use an object or whatever. There's a lot of different things you could set up on these conditions, but this just determines whether or not an NPC can actually use the animation that's on a particular object. So it's nothing to do with assignment. Now, this preview transform, we covered this in the 103 video about how it has to do with workshop items and how they're displayed. We don't need to cover it in this particular video because it's not that important for the sake of setting up new furniture. The idols section and the anim event, these two, as far as I can tell, and I haven't gone through every single item, but as far as I can tell, are never used in Fallout 4. So I believe this is a holdover system from Skyrim. You might find an example if you were to go one item at a time. I assume essentially what's going to happen here is you are telling the game to use a particular idle animation as opposed to the keyword system, but I am not positive that it even functions. This is an interesting point in the creation kit, is not everything you find in here is actually functional. There are a fair number of things that are holdovers from the older games that just aren't, even though you could set them up, they won't actually do anything once in game. And I'll try and advise you on those things when I find them. This is one, I believe, the case that the idle section and anim event don't actually function. I could be wrong on that, and if you happen to know differently, definitely comment below so that I can update this video with maybe a message over top that says I'm incorrect, or actually re-record the thing. Enter with weapon drawn. This would basically make the NPC keep their weapon out when they begin their animation to sit down with it. I don't know of an example where that would be used. Possibly something like a guard post, it might be useful. I don't believe it's used by anything in the vanilla game. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, please. All right, now we're back to the keyword section. So I'm going to go over what all of these different keywords are and explain what they're actually doing. What you'll tend to do is when you're building your own assignable objects, you're going to pick an object that Bethesda created by filtering on Workshop and just work with that. And the only keywords you'll usually change out are going to be the anim fern keywords, and most of the rest of them that you find you're going to leave. But just for the sake of being thorough and maybe to give you guys some ideas of things you could do to tweak or get more creative with things, I'm going to just explain how they all work, because it might be that this gives you some idea that I hadn't even thought about yet. So this attraction type AO type bar, this is a unique one just on the bars that you can build in workshop mode. And this is used by the companions. You may have never even seen this in the game. I didn't even know it was there until I started editing the game heavily, but all of the companions have the capability of using the bar and actually interacting with the settlers. They have a couple of back and forth lines where they'll essentially order a drink or at least have some sort of basic conversation with the settler. And this AO type bar allows them to do that. The next one, block player activation. This is one I find very useful, not all the time, but at least for things like these shops. And block player activation essentially means the player will not get that little activate option when you highlight over that item outside of workshop mode. So I'm sure you've seen a chair will say X sit when you go over it. And a lot of other items have that option for you to interact with them. Well, things like shops wouldn't make any sense for the player to interact with the item because you want the NPC to interact and use the animation, not the player. So the block player activation essentially allows you to prevent the player, but let all of the NPCs still use that object. All right, furniture class work. This explicitly has to do with the AI packages. So all of these settlers have AI set up so that between certain hours of the day, and by default, it should be between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., they will work. So they will go to whatever object has this furniture class work that they're assigned to. Then from 8 p.m. to midnight, they will go to anything that has a different keyword called furniture class relax. I believe that's what it's called, furniture. Let's just double check that real quick, just so I'm not giving you false information. Although, again, this is one of those things where you'll likely not be changing it, but it could be useful if you wanted to create some situation where you had you took an existing object and changed the hours that they were working it. This might be interesting to do, but furniture class relaxation, yes, that's what it's called. That's between 8 and 12, and then between 12 and 7, they will sleep. And those hours are, that's what's in the vanilla game. It could be changed by some mod you have. So if you're finding that they're acting differently, it might be one of your mods has tweaked those numbers. So furniture class work you'll find on most work objects. And then the next one down, furniture scale actor to 1. This essentially means that the NPC is going to get scaled to the object, to the work object. So for example, if you build this in the creation kit somewhere and you scale it up, then when the NPC goes to use it, they will actually get scaled accordingly. And so you can end up with like weird shaped NPCs. An example of where that can happen is if you look at the chalk drawing. Let me see if I can find that here. We'll type in chalk under furniture. NPC kids sitting chalk drawing. If you let an adult NPC use this, they will actually get scaled. Okay, you know what? I've got that backwards. I apologize. So the scale actor to 1 is basically to prevent them from getting scaled. So if you were ever to place this kid sitting chalk drawing, for example, on the Central Park from Sim Settlements, we have this set up, and you'll find that what happens is when an adult uses it, they get shrunk down to the size of a kid, and it looks very awkward, and that was a mistake that we just never fixed because I found it kind of funny. But the furniture scale actor to 1 basically prevents the actor from being resized. So I had that backwards. I thought it was they resized it, but it's lacking that. So this is something you'll probably want on all of your furniture objects to make sure that your NPCs don't get resized. But maybe there's a funny reason that you want them to end up smaller or something, and then not having that keyword would do that. Furniture special, I find on all sorts of objects. I don't know specifically what it does other than if you find a vanilla object that has it on there that you're editing, just leave it on there. I haven't had any trouble not adding it to new items that I'm creating where I'm using other animations, so I don't think it's mandatory. There are occasions that I found in the creation kit where Bethesda did something and it seems to have no actual effect, and it could just be a holdover from earlier in their development process that they opted to just leave in because it was all working and they didn't want to risk breaking anything. So this could be the case of one of those type of things, or it might have some effect that I'm not even aware of that's happening under the hood. But for as far as I know, just leave it there. It doesn't hurt anything, but you don't actually need to add it generally either. All right, the next one is workshop relaxation object, and you might mistake this for the furniture class relaxation, and I wouldn't blame you. I thought they were the same thing for the longest time. What it turns out is that workshop relaxation object, this is what draws all of the settlers into this particular thing at night. That's why you will find in the evening that most of your settlers hang around at one of your bars, and that's because of this workshop relaxation object keyword. So if you are looking to make a special relaxation object that can draw in NPCs to it in the evening so that they're more likely to not only use it, but just hang around it, that's what this particular keyword does. And then lastly, we have the workshop work object. So this one confused me for a bit, and originally I thought it had to do more with what this does, furniture class work, which was to make them use it during the work hours. But in reality, what it actually does is allows your object to be assignable in workshop mode. So without this workshop work object, you actually can't assign anybody to your particular object. So your workshop work object is actually on things like beds as well. Even though that's technically not work, you still need this keyword on anything you want to be assignable. All right, so next let's go to actor values. So this is another one of those topics like keywords where it's very advanced. We'll come back to it again and talk about it many times, but I'm going to just go roughly over what actor values do and then talk in specific about these particular actor values. So the idea behind an actor value is basically that you take some sort of part of the game, so something about it. So in this case, you can use these as examples. You've got workshop rating, bonus happiness, workshop rating, vendor type bar, etc. You basically are taking that particular variable and you're applying a value to it for this object. So in this case, this one is a great simple example. Workshop rating, bonus happiness 15. That means when this object is built and there's someone assigned to it, your settlement gets plus 15 to the happiness bonus. Now, one thing to note about happiness, it's a very complex thing. That doesn't mean that it's just going to increase happiness by 15. Happiness is incredibly complex. If you're a Sim Settlements player, I've actually documented exactly how the code works, and in as simple a terms as I could come up with, I think they're fairly easy to digest if you want to go read through that. If you open up the Sim Settlements holotape, the City Manager holotape, and you go down to reports and then happiness report, there's an option in there to view details of how the happiness report is calculated, and I went through and explained it out in a few pages of information in game so that you can learn how the formula works. But just know that this is not a direct plus 15 to your happiness score. It's a part of a larger calculation. And that's why, you know, dropping down a couple of bars doesn't just instantly boost you to 100 happiness. Next up is workshop rating vendor type bar. This, as far as I know, this actually isn't used by anything, but I wouldn't remove it either. So we have created custom shops in Sim Settlements where we don't include these at all, and they work just fine. So I don't know exactly where this is used. I haven't found any instances of it being used other than by these actual furniture objects. So it could be one of two things. Either it's used at the engine level and I just don't have any documentation of it, or it's another one of those things like this furniture special where it might be a holdover that Bethesda put in there. And again, just leave it. So if you find that on an object you're editing, just leave it there. It's fine. So let's go down to the next one, workshop resource object. So this one is very important, and this one needs to go on any object where you want to apply some benefit to your settlement. So if you're looking to add your workshop object to create some happiness bonus, or to generate income, or to generate defense or food or water, the first thing that the game does is looks for this workshop resource object actor value equal to 1. As long as that's there, it tells the game, hey, I've got other actor values that are useful to you, and you're going to want to grab those as well. So without this workshop rating bonus wouldn't actually occur. It would never actually affect the settlement. So it first looks for objects for this, and then once it finds those, it knows it should scan that object deeper and look for some of these other actor values. So this one is really important if you're looking to add anything that tweaks in the in-game. If you look, the best way to look at it is think about in workshop mode up at the top, you've got those different values that you can be tweaked. If you're looking to tweak one of those with your workshop object, the first thing you should do is add this workshop resource object, and then you'll add the corresponding actor value. And just like I said, with a lot of this stuff, you can find out this by just duplicating existing items. But let's say, for example, we wanted our outhouse bar to add defense for some reason. The best way to figure out how to do that is to go look up the object that you're looking, an object that you know has that particular feature. So I know the guard posts have that. So if I search for guard posts, so we've got workshop guard post furniture, and we look at the actor, and it's taken a while to load. If we look at the actor values it's using, you can figure out very quickly. It's got, first off, the workshop resource object that we talked about that it needs, which means that by process of elimination, the only other one that could be providing the defense is this guy right here. So we would just set the same thing up on our object. So if we wanted our bar to add defense, it looks like defense is actually called safety in the CK, and I absolutely knew that, but this is how you would learn that over time. And eventually I will cover that explicitly and give you all of this information. But while I'm trying to get these broad strokes covered, a lot of this you're going to want to find by just digging into other items so that you can learn the details while so you're not sitting here waiting for me to give you all of that information. All right, and then the last one here is vendor income. This is another one just like bonus happiness. It's a very complicated formula. I can basically tell you it works approximately like this, is that the vendor income is based on number of settlers that you have. So you'd get 1 cap per settler for having this particular object in your base, but then that's multiplied by a formula that partially includes your happiness rating as a percentage. So for example, if we had 20 settlers, you would assume this generates 20 income, but if your happiness is only at 80, you only get 80% of that, so you would actually only get 16. And then there's also a hard cap across all of your vendor income values that you can't make more than 50 caps in a day in any particular settlement. And then there are some other factors that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head here, but just know that vendor income is roughly equivalent to this many caps per day per settler. If you look at the other stores, so if we look up the other bars here, so if we go to workshop bar 2, for example, you'll see that the vendor income is actually 2, which means that each level higher, or each Each higher bar level or shop type will generate a more income. So the level 2 one creates twice the income. The level 3 one creates 3 times the income. So that's on top of the fact that they also offer a different set of merchandise. They also increase your vendor income stat. Vendor income can be applied to anything. Same with workshop rating bonus happiness. It doesn't have anything to do with the animations. The game's completely agnostic to it. Bethesda just tried to pick thematic things. You obviously can do whatever you want. You could create like a super item that gives max defense, max happiness, max vendor income, max water food. You could make one super object. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's a mod out there that already does that, but that's how versatile this system is. You can add whatever actor values you want, and as long as you have this workshop resource object at 1, the game will pick up all those other actor values and apply them to your settlement. All right, next up is has container. This tends to be used on the crafting workbenches, and basically that means that that item can store things. Now, some of you who are Sim Settlements players are probably wondering like why the workshop workbenches that are inside some of the vanilla Sim Settlements shops don't connect to the actual to the workbench. That's handled at the engine level, and I could make the Sim Settlements plots do it. I choose not to intentionally because they're meant to just be animation markers. But if you decide to build yourself your own custom workshop item and you check in this has container, by default, it will be linked to the workshop system. Like it will be linked to that local workbench, and you would see the same stuff in just like you do in the vanilla workbenches. So my Sim Settlements shop items are explicitly set up the way they are intentionally, but just know if you check in this has container, as a workshop item, it will automatically be linked up to the workbench of that particular settlement. So that's useful to know. And you can set this up to have items in it. So if we check in, it has container here. It'll be empty by default, but we could right click here and hit new and arrange for our item to come packed with items. I don't recommend you doing that because it would be a pretty cheaty thing. Like the players would essentially, every time they built a copy of this, they would get all of the items again included. So probably don't want to do that, but you could if you wanted to. Next up here is the associated form. This is another one of those ones I believe is a holdover. I haven't found anything that's using this particular thing. And then the forced location ref type. This is one most of you will never get into. I'm not even going to cover what it does right now because it's so advanced and requires a lot more lessons before we get to it. So you're probably never going to use this. Drinking water type might be useful if you wanted to create alternate versions of the water pumps that give you say, for example, they gave you pure water instead of dirty water when you drank them or something like that. You can change the actual water type that happens when you drink them. And while I'm on that subject here, if we go ahead and bring up water pump, just so I can show you what it looks like. Water pump is actually one of those ones that doesn't have workshop in the name. And I'm uncertain why that is. I think it was just maybe they came up with they came up with the standardization for naming later. So know that I told you to search for workshop to find everything. If something's not showing up, just search for what you think might be part of the name in the game to try and find that object. So in this case, they just left the drinking water type as none. So it's just going to use the default system. It looks like they use an actual script, drink from fountain script. So it's possible that this drinking water type doesn't work with the settlement objects. I've never messed with this, but theoretically, if this is set up, you should be able to override the type of water. I would imagine this script also has a method to do the water, so I'm not going to cover that in particular right this second, but I just wanted to go over what this particular field did. And then lastly, we have the activate text override. That water pump was a great example of a way to use that, where you might want it to show the player, instead of just the word activate, which is what will happen by default, all objects that a player can interact with, when they hover over it, it will just show the word activate with the key that they're supposed to press, but you can override that and change it to something else. So like it was appropriate here for them to change it to pump for the water pump. A lot of them just have the word use, U-S-E. In this particular object's case, because this is a shop and we have block player activation on, we don't actually care what this is. The player's never going to see it anyway. So that covers everything that has to do with these particular workshop items, except for the last thing we skipped, which was this workshop object script. So before we go into this particular one has a lot of stuff on it, and a lot of it you'll never ever use. I'm going to go over it for the sake of being thorough of all the different fields, but don't be overwhelmed by this. I'm going to show you what the bare minimum fields are first that you would actually need to fill out so you understand how simple these workshop object scripts actually are. So when we open this up by double clicking this, and this is how you can get access to a script's properties to change how things are working. If your object doesn't have a script and you're looking to add one, note that all assignable objects do need this workshop object script. That's very important. The game uses that to store some data on there. If you don't see this, or if you're building a furniture item from scratch for some reason, you can click add here and just search this particular script up. But workshop object script is what the game uses for workshop objects. All right, so let's bring that back up. So we've got all our properties. So if you were to start, if you look at this on most workshop items, the only thing that's actually filled out for most of them is workshop parent. And the nice thing about this is the way they set it up, there's only one option. So you can actually just click this, and you can either double click it and then select it from the menu, or you can click it and click this autofill option over here, and it will fill it in for you, and then you hit OK and you're done. That's most workshop objects. This particular object is more complex, and I want to go over what all of these do anyway, just so those of you guys who are interested in experimenting can start figuring it out. But know that for the most part, you guys aren't going to ever mess with most of this stuff unless you're getting into more advanced stuff. The one thing that might be useful for you to play around with would be this work 24 hours by changing this to true, and you do that by double clicking this and then checking it in. You turn it into an around the clock job, which in the vanilla game is only the guard posts, but you could make any item that way if you wanted to, if you don't care about the settlers sleeping. So we're going to leave that checked in just because it'll make it easier for when we go to test our bar in the game. Okay, so B marker gets ownership. So this is something that by default I believe is true, and you can find out what a default is by clearing the value. So you select, and actually, and I'm talking about something you can't see. I was talking about autofill. I had my screen too wide there. There's that autofill button I was just talking about a moment ago. All right, so if I select one of these fields and hit clear value, it'll go back to the default when I have it selected, and you can see it says default true. So by default, it's saying that any furniture markers do get owned by the person who owns this particular object. So owning a workshop object is when you assign them. So when you see a settler is assigned to something, whether you did it manually or the workshop system itself assigned them to something, or some settlements assign them to something, most items get owned by the NPC. Now what this particular section is saying, and you can see here that there are these little headers that are above certain sections, and they kind of group together these options on the workshop object script. These are basically property groups, and if you double click them, they collapse, and so that they hide the stuff. But everything that's under them tends to all have to do with the same thing. So furniture marker is something special that is used in a variety of the workshop items, and essentially what this does is when the item is created, so when you craft it in workshop mode, when you place it down, what ends up happening is the equivalent of these interact points. So the interact points we know were this furniture marker where the NPC can use it. Essentially this section allows this object to create a bunch more of these interact points. And what you're doing here with B markers get ownership is if you leave that as true, the default, all of these item markers that might get created, which I'll explain these other fields and how they're actually created in a moment. But by leaving this default, the owner of this particular object also owns those. So that's kind of how Sim Settlements works, where our plots have multiple animation markers. Is we use a system similar to this. We don't use the actual built-in one from the game. I've written my own for Sim Settlements, but essentially, we just allow the settler to have multiple animation markers that represent that job, and this kind of does the same thing. So the bar, what it's doing is it doesn't want the bar owner to own this, because what the bar actually does, you might not have even known this, but it places out 2 or 3 extra furniture markers so that settlers who stand near the bar can do animations. So they'll do things like drink, or I believe they'll eat noodles. Anyway, there's a couple of different things that they can do, and they will do that near the bar, and this is how they do it. B place marker on creation. This is something they specifically added to make the teleporter system work. So you will virtually never use that unless you get really advanced and you're making crazy stuff like the teleport system, which is heavily scripted. So I don't think you'll ever use that. Same with this B special marker. Special marker gets ownership. These two were specifically put in here for the teleportation system that was done in the main quest line of Fallout 4. So you'll never use those. Furniture base. So this is telling it what furniture marker to create. So similar, what we did was we set our marker model and we set our anim fern. What this system has to do is basically you tell it which of these furniture objects it should create. Now this one, even adding more to the complexity, and this is why I said don't get hung up on this stuff. This is advanced. I'm covering it all now so that when you get to this point, if you're looking to understand more of how these things work, you can tweak them with a little more knowledge. Maybe come back to this part of the video. If for the most part, we've already covered what most of you will use, so I'm just going over this for thoroughness. But in this case, it's using a form list, and we'll cover form lists in a lot of detail. But a form list is essentially, instead of choosing one item, you get to choose a group of items. And that's a very simplistic explanation of it. That's not 100% accurate. Just giving you a rundown of what this particular property does. But what they've done is they've set up multiple different workshops, or rather multiple different furniture objects that can get created. And that's how you end up with that some people are eating noodles and some people are drinking, and that they're all still standing around those bars. Furniture marker nodes. This is a very advanced topic. If you don't know what nodes are, don't worry about it. We'll get to that in the future, and you will understand. I promise. It's simpler than you might think it is. But for those of you who do know things like NIF scope, these are just nodes that are in the NIF file, and they're telling the game where to place some of these furniture base objects. So wherever there's one of these nodes named specifically these inside the NIF file, it will create one of these furniture base objects. Special furniture base. So this special furniture stuff was all added here for robot NPCs to be able to work things, because some of the robots are awkwardly sized where they wouldn't line up nicely. So if you can imagine for example, an Assaultron is not going to be able to sit down on a toilet. So you have the option of setting up special furniture, so that special animation markers for them to use specifically. I imagine this system could be expanded to other types, but as far as I know, in every single vanilla workshop item, they are only set up for robots. But theoretically, you could set up special ones that had special markers for super mutants or some other race that you wanted to support in some way. In our case, we're going to clear these out. We're not setting up these robot nodes because we don't have them. We actually don't have any of these nodes set up because this is our custom model. So we're going to just clear all this out. We don't want all this stuff getting created. So I'm going to just grab each of these and click the clear value button on the top right, because we don't want those, because we don't have those in our custom model. All right, so now we're going to collapse that furniture marker to get it out of the way. Then we're going to go to vendor data. For the most part, if you're creating a shop, like if you're making your own shop item, just take one of the vanilla ones and edit those. And because you're going to want to use the default dialog anyway, so you're likely not going to be creating a fully custom shop with custom inventory. I will likely cover that one day, but it's probably a ways down the line. We do have scripts included with the Builder's Toolkit. I believe we have a script for this in Sim Settlements. There's also a script on the simsettlements.com forums, and once I have a chance to look it over, I might include it on the resource mod that I put up on Nexus for this particular tutorial series. If it is written in such a way that you could use it independently, I'll throw it up there just as a modder's resource, but I can't recall off the top of my head if it's usable by anybody or if it requires a lot of scripting knowledge. So depending on that case, you guys might get another resource out of me. But I want to explain what these fields do anyway, for those of you who are a little more advanced and you're looking to tweak things. So the vendor level determines which shop items they have. So if you've played around with the vanilla shops, you'll know that each of those 3 shops costs you more money to place down, and each one provides a higher level inventory. And there's always talk of the mysterious level 4 vendor. That's not actually a thing. What it is there's like one or two extra items that get added to certain vendors if they're working a particular shop. So every shop has 3 vendor levels, and it's done in what's called a zero-based index, and that effectively, that's a computer thing. All it means is that 0 equals 1, 1 equals 2, 2 equals 3. It's confusing. If you're not into computer science, don't worry about it. Just know that the first number in a 0 index is 0. So in this case, vendor levels go 0, 1, 2 in the creation kit, even though you might call them levels 1, 2, and 3 of the type. So by leaving it blank, the default 0, that means this is the normal baseline shop, which that's what we want to keep it as. And then the vendor type, this tells you which of the vendors it should be using. So whether it's the bar or the clothing store or the armor store, etc. And you can find out which number you should be using by just looking at the vanilla workshop items and figuring out which one. So we know we started with a bar, and that's what we're creating anyway. So we know we want this to just be left alone. So we'll leave that as the number 3. All right, then the ungrouped properties. Here we got a bunch more stuff here. Assigned actor link keyword. This is something that almost never gets used. In fact, the way it gets used isn't even correct. So you've all had the issue where settlers kind of run in kamikaze into combat and they don't actually stay anywhere reasonable. Even the guys assigned to guard posts will tend to just run in kamikaze and fight the enemies really ridiculously. This particular field was supposed to prevent that. The way they've got it set up, it doesn't work that well. And you can find an example of it by bringing up one of those guard posts, and you'll see the keyword that they actually use to make it work. You would just use that same keyword. If you want your NPC that owns this thing to stay near it during combat. That's essentially what this is for. All right, B, allow auto repair. This is enabled by true, and a lot of people I don't think realize this is even happening. But if the object is destructible, so in the base game, that's things like crops and generators and turrets, by default, they all have auto repair on. And that means each day that passes in game, there's a chance that these items will repair themselves if they were destroyed in a raid. So if for some reason, if you wanted to, say, make an overhaul where items were never auto repaired, you could open up each of them and edit, even though, as I've said in previous tutorials, I don't recommend editing vanilla items. You could do that as an overhaul, is uncheck this, and then that would force the player to have to repair things, or something like the settlement repair bot mod. It would make that thing more useful if the things weren't auto repairing. But most objects in the vanilla game all have auto repair turned on so that they will just repair themselves over time. Allow player assignment. So this is going to be pretty much true all the time. The only reason you wouldn't set that true is if you wanted to set up an item similar to like the Overseer's desk in the Vault-Tec DLC. It's pretty advanced though, because then the only way to assign things is via a script. So that's how they're allowed to, that's how they can assign only the Overseer to the desk, as opposed to you being able to assign manually, is basically with this checkbox here. So by default, you do want this to be true. You want to be able to have your players assigning NPCs to that object. Default player ownership. This is what allows things to be targeted by enemies. So if you wanted, for the most part, the enemies are only going to target things that have destruction anyway, because, and I would say at this point, if you're still new, you're probably not going to be adding destruction. I mean, even we've been building some settlements for literally years now, and we still don't have destruction data set up for our stuff. So maybe if one of you wants to get more advanced with it, you could set up an item so that it doesn't get attacked by enemies. But if that's the case, then why bother setting up destruction data? So I don't actually understand why this field is even really set up. I imagine it was one of those things that was done, again, specifically for the teleporter. There seems to be a lot of stuff they had to go back and do to make the teleporter work as they wanted, because the teleporter does have a destruction phase where it's after it's been used, and obviously you don't want the raiders coming in during a raid and destroying the thing and ruining it before the player gets to finish their quest. So I'm pretty sure that's the only reason that that actually exists. We talked about B-Work 24 hours already. Damage helper is something that's explicitly used right now by the crops, which if you're looking to mess with those aren't actually furniture. Those are flora. Those are more complex. I'll go over those maybe some other video. I think you can probably reverse engineer how they work, but they're very difficult to create new versions of anyway. You could create versions of them for some of the crops that aren't available in the vanilla game, but those mods have already been done already. Several mods have already gone through and taken all of the crop models that are available in Fallout 4 and created harvestable workshop item versions. So if you're looking to learn how to create your own crops, you're going to want to look at some of those mods. Just open those up in the creation kit and figure out how their forms are set up. But that's what the damage helper is for. It could probably be used for other things, but you're talking custom models. So again, way more advanced than we're going to talk about in this particular video. And then that leads us back to workshop parent, which we said at the beginning. That's the bare minimum what you need to set up for any workshop object item to work. All right, so that covers everything. That was a lot, obviously, but I'm going to go ahead and show you this in game to show you how it works, because we've got this thing all set up. And you'll notice when you think about what I actually changed, it wasn't that much to make my own custom model bar. What I changed was the ID field, the name. I changed the model to my model, and in the case, because I wanted the sitting, which is the default animation, I erased the marker model. You might have, for yours, if you wanted a different animation, you might have used a different marker model, and then I clicked the interact point and aligned it to my model so it looks nice. I unchecked the circles that I didn't want to show up, and I changed out the anim for a keyword. But everything else, I've pretty much left the same. I did remove some of this stuff in here. If I had left that there, though, it wouldn't have hurt anything, because the game is smart enough to, if it tries to do some of this stuff and it can't. For example, I said I don't have these nodes set up, so it wouldn't work for me. I'm just doing that because I'm trying to be thorough. If you had left that stuff, it would have totally worked anyway. But for the most part, you're mostly just changing out model, marker, and the name field, and then tweaking a few little settings to get your animation to work nicely. So that's all I had to do, and now I'm going to have this bar that will let me or this outhouse that will let me actually assign an NPC to it and buy from them as if they're a bartender. So I'm going to show you that in game now. Oh, I guess I got to hit create a new form. And one step I am skipping here that some of you may be wondering is how do you make it buildable? That was covered in the previous tutorial, so I'm going to assume that if you want to know that, you can go back and watch that tutorial because it's the exact same process. All right, so we are in game here. I've got the workshop mode open already, and bar is actually called food and drink, and you can see my outhouse bar is here, so we're going to go ahead and build this guy. And we are going to assign one of these people to it and let them assign to it instead of whatever else they were assigned to. And it'll just take a moment for it to handle all this. This is my Let's Play save, which is pretty loaded with stuff, so it might take a moment before she picks up on it, but we'll just give her a second here. We'll try it again just to make sure I hit it, because it didn't highlight, which was awkward. Now, if any of you had followed, while I'm waiting for her to assign, if any of you had followed along with my tutorial where I built this actual outhouse, and you find that your particular version, if you built it exactly the same, falls into the ground. The reason mine doesn't is because I did some tweaking in NifScope, and that will be something I teach you guys eventually. So just know that it's normal if yours fell through. But as you can see, she walked in from the front. She didn't come in through the side, so that's good. It means our interaction point is set up correctly. So now if we go talk to her.
Hey there.
What can I get you?
We immediately get the options you'd expect from the bartender. So if we ask how are things, we'll get the rumor.
Comes to mind.
So she would have said if there was a problem with our food or water.
Can I get you a drink?
And then if we go to barter, we will get
Here's
the normal barter menu you get from level 1 bar. So everything is working, and it was that easy. I basically just had to change out model files, move around the positioning of the marker, and change that anim for a key worker. And we have ourselves a working bar that's actually an outhouse.